A poor housekeeper begs her wealthy employer not to get married, but he fires her in front of everyone. Years later, he realizes he has made a fatal mistake. You won't believe what happens next. Watch until the end. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching us from. The dawn came quietly over Napa Valley, sliding golden light across the slopes lined with vines heavy with dew. The soft rustle of leaves stirred under the early breeze, and the hum of distant tractors moved slowly along the narrow paths between the rows. Birds settled on the wires stretched between the poles, shaking off the coolness of the night, and the scent of earth rose softly as the sun warmed the soil. From the outside, the Wells estate looked like a painting of orderly American wealth. The gravel driveway raked clean, the roses along the front path blooming in carefully managed brilliance, the tall windows reflecting the waking sky in still glass. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and coffee. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that belonged to a house used to its routines and expectations, where noise was a sign of inefficiency and silence was the measure of control. The grand staircase curved down into the foyer like a ribbon of pale marble, and above it, the chandelier still held tiny droplets of water from last night's cleaning, catching the morning light in sharp glints. Marcia had been awake long before the sun lifted itself over the valley. Her alarm went off at 4:30, and she lay still for a moment, listening to the steady breath of her mother in the next room of their small cottage on the edge of the estate. She pushed away the heaviness in her bones, the soft pull of exhaustion that never truly left her, and rose to dress quietly, pulling her hair into a low braid and smoothing her uniform over her hips before stepping outside into the cool dawn. By the time she reached the big house, the sky was beginning to color, and she moved through the staff entrance without a sound, her keys jangling softly as she unlocked the storage rooms and prepared the cleaning carts. She started with the kitchen, wiping down surfaces, emptying the dishwasher, refilling the coffee canisters so the cook could begin her preparations without delay. She checked the pantry, ensuring nothing was expired or misplaced, her eyes catching the labels automatically, her hands moving with quiet certainty. In the grand dining room, Marcia moved methodically, adjusting the heavy drapes to let in just enough light, smoothing the tablecloth so that no wrinkle betrayed carelessness. She cleaned the frames of the paintings on the walls, catching the fine layer of dust that always returned no matter how often it was wiped away. She polished the silver handles of the sideboard, checked the china for fingerprints, and aligned the chairs so they were evenly spaced, as Mrs. Wells had always liked them, even though she was gone now, leaving the house to her son, Garrett. Garrett Wells, whose name appeared in magazines, whose photographs with politicians and celebrities lined the walls of his office, whose vineyards produced some of the finest wines on the West Coast, was a man who lived with quiet intensity. He was tall, with hair kept neat and a smile that looked effortless in photographs, but rarely appeared in private moments when he thought no one was looking. Marcia saw those moments often, the way he stood by the window in the late evenings, phone in hand, staring into the darkened vineyard with something close to loneliness in his eyes. The house, for all its size, for all its carefully arranged beauty, was a quiet place. It had always been so, even when Garrett's parents were alive, but since their passing, it felt even more like a museum of their memory than a home. The walls held their pictures, and the rooms still smelled faintly of his mother's perfume. But Garrett lived within it as a man living in a shell, moving through the halls with a focus that was less about the present and more about what was to come. Marcia knew the rhythms of the house as well as she knew the rhythms of her own breath. She knew when Garrett would come downstairs, dressed in his pressed suits, tie perfect, shoes shining, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She knew how he liked his coffee, one sugar, no cream, and how he would take it to the window to sip while checking emails. She knew when he was in a good mood, when he was troubled, when he was thinking too much and forgetting to eat. She knew, too, how to disappear when guests arrived, when meetings took over the dining room, when the weight of the house seemed to grow heavier with the presence of people who came to see what they could take from Garrett's growing empire. She moved like a shadow, cleaning, preparing, making sure that everything was ready for the day's plans. And today, the plans were many. Today was a day of preparations, because the wedding was coming, and the house was alive with the quiet undercurrent of expectation that came with it. Florists would be arriving, and the wedding planner would be inspecting the grounds for the perfect placement of the outdoor reception. The catering team would be checking the kitchens, and the decorators would be bringing in samples of linens and colors for final approval. Lauren Hughes was coming today, too, as she did almost every day now. She was the fiancée, the soon-to-be Mrs. Wells, a woman with golden hair that fell in perfect waves, with eyes that smiled at everyone, with a laugh that carried through the halls like the chime of a bell. She was beautiful in the way people expected the fiancée of a man like Garrett Wells to be, and she knew how to carry herself through the rooms as if she owned them already, offering compliments with a warmth that seemed genuine to everyone who heard them. Marcia watched her closely, not out of envy, but out of something else. Something that tightened in her chest when she saw how Lauren's eyes would flick away from the staff, how her smile would slip when she thought no one was looking, how her voice would sharpen just slightly when she corrected a worker or questioned an arrangement that was not to her liking. Marcia saw the way Lauren walked into Garrett's office unannounced, the way she picked up his phone, scrolling quickly before setting it back down, the way she adjusted the papers on his desk, as if searching for something. It was not Marcia's place to notice these things. It was not her place to say anything, to question, to think beyond the duties of her position, but she saw, and she could not unsee. And each day, the weight of what she saw pressed more heavily against her ribs, making it harder to breathe when she lay down to rest at night. That afternoon, as the florists arrived with samples and the decorators measured the archways, Lauren arrived, stepping out of her car with the effortless grace of someone who knew she was watched and admired. She greeted the staff with bright smiles, thanking them, complimenting them, but Marcia saw how her eyes swept over them without truly seeing, how her hand waved dismissively when one of the workers tried to confirm an arrangement with her. Lauren made her way into the house, greeting Garrett with a kiss on the cheek, laughing as she adjusted his tie, holding his face in her hands for a moment as the photographers they had hired snapped pictures for the upcoming announcement. Garrett smiled, but Marcia saw how his eyes flickered past Lauren's shoulder, how they looked tired even as his lips curved. Marcia moved quietly along the hallway, sweeping, dusting, adjusting the fresh flowers in the vases, always watching, always listening. She heard the conversations about the wedding, the discussions about guest lists, the arguments over colors and flowers that Lauren handled with a sweet but firm finality that left no room for disagreement. Later, as the sun began to set over the vineyard, casting long shadows across the floor, Marcia was in Garrett's office, dusting the shelves, replacing the water in the vase on his desk. Lauren had left a paper there, a small piece with numbers and a name Marcia did not recognize. She should not have looked, but the neatness of the numbers, the way they were written in the same pen Lauren used for notes, drew her eye. She memorized them, folding the paper carefully, placing it back where it had been. That night, in her small room, with the lamp casting a weak light on the thin blanket that covered her knees, Marcia sat with her hands clasped, the numbers repeating in her mind. She did not know what they meant, but she knew they were important. She knew something was coming, something she could not stop, but perhaps she could warn. She thought of her mother, of the small house they shared, of the bills that always came, of the fear that losing her job would mean losing everything they had struggled to hold on to. She thought of Garrett, of the way he looked when he thought no one was watching, of the sadness that sat on his shoulders like a second skin. Marcia pressed her hands together until her knuckles whitened. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant losing everything. She would speak. She would tell Garrett what she saw, what she felt, what she feared. She would speak, even if it cost her the fragile safety she had built in the shadows of the Wells estate. As the night deepened and the house grew quiet, as the world outside the window darkened into the soft hush of midnight, Marcia closed her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, a world where she was not afraid to speak the truth. In the silence of that moment, she made her decision, holding it close, ready for the morning when everything would change. The morning light spilled across the kitchen tiles, warming the air with a golden softness that felt almost deceptive. Outside, the vineyard shimmered under the gentle haze that would lift as the sun rose higher, revealing rows of green in perfect, disciplined lines. The Wells estate buzzed quietly in preparation for another day closer to the wedding, another day of meetings, tastings, and final fittings. The wedding was 2 weeks away, and the house felt it in every polished surface and carefully placed flower arrangement. Marcia was up before dawn, as always, her hands steady as she tied her apron around her waist, checking her pockets for the small cloth she used to wipe away fingerprints that might betray carelessness. She had not slept well, the decision she had made last night pressing heavily against her chest as she moved through the house, cleaning, tidying, preparing. Her mind repeated the numbers she had seen on the paper in Garrett's office, the names she did not recognize, the way Lauren's eyes had flicked toward the paper when she left it behind. She saw the way Lauren had smiled at Garrett, the way her hand tightened on his arm when the cameras clicked, the way she moved through the house with quiet ownership. Marcia moved through the halls as the staff prepared for the arrival of Lauren and the wedding planner, arranging samples of flowers in the grand foyer, ensuring that the air smelled of roses and fresh linen. The kitchen filled with the scent of baking bread, and the faint notes of classical music played softly from the speakers installed in the corners of the ceiling, filling the space with a calm that felt artificial. She timed her steps carefully, listening for Garrett's approach, waiting for the right moment. He was in his office, the door half open, reading something on his tablet, his coffee cooling beside him. His hair was neat, his shirt crisp, his posture perfect, but there was a tightness in his jaw, a subtle exhaustion around his eyes that she had seen grow in recent weeks. He was tired, but he would not allow himself to show it, not with the wedding so close, not with the photographers arriving each morning to capture the perfect couple in casual moments for the society pages. Marcia paused in the hallway, pressing a hand against her chest to steady the trembling she could not quite control. She stepped into the office, holding her cleaning cloth in one hand, the other clenching and unclenching at her side as she cleared her throat softly. Garrett did not look up immediately, his eyes still on the screen, scrolling through an email, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words seemed to echo in the quiet room. He looked up, blinking, surprised to see her standing there. His eyes moved to the clock on the wall, then back to her, a polite smile that did not reach his eyes forming on his lips. "Yes, Marcia?" he asked, setting the tablet down, picking up his coffee, taking a sip. She swallowed, her mouth dry, her fingers tightening around the cloth in her hand. "I need to speak with you," she said, forcing the words out before fear could stop her. His smile faltered, a crease appearing between his brows. He glanced at the clock again. "Can it wait? I have a call in 15 minutes. "It can't wait," she said, her voice firmer now, though her hands trembled. He set the coffee down, leaning back in his chair, studying her with the calm, assessing look he gave people when he was deciding how much attention to give them. "All right. 2 minutes. Go ahead." Marcia stepped forward, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. She took a deep breath, lifting her eyes to meet his, letting him see the fear, the urgency, the truth that burned inside her. "Please, sir, don't marry Miss Lauren." For a moment, the words hung in the air, heavy and strange, and the silence that followed was louder than any sound Marcia had ever heard in that house. Garrett's face froze, his eyes widening slightly before narrowing, confusion and irritation battling in the lines around his mouth. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice calm, but there was a sharpness to it, a warning. "I know it's not my place," Marcia rushed on. "I know I'm just a maid, but something is wrong. She's not who she says she is. I see things, I hear things. Please, sir, you have to believe me." His expression darkened, his jaw tightening, his hands pressing against the arms of the chair as he leaned forward. "Marcia, do you realize what you're saying? Do you understand how out of line this is?" Marcia's breath caught, but she forced herself to continue, her voice shaking. "Last night, I had a dream. I know it sounds foolish, but it was so clear. You were at the wedding, but everything went wrong. People were crying, there was fire, and your name was on the news. Please, sir, don't marry her." His eyes flashed, anger rising in the sharpness of his gaze. "Are you mad?" Marcia dropped to her knees, clutching the cloth to her chest, tears threatening but not falling. "No, sir, I'm not mad. I swear to you, I'm not mad." From the hallway came the sharp, measured click of heels on marble, and Marcia's eyes closed for a moment as she felt the shift in the air. Lauren stepped into the room, her hair pinned perfectly, her dress flawless, a phone in her hand as she glanced between them, a slight frown on her beautiful face. "What's going on here?" Lauren asked, her voice calm, curious, but there was a coldness in her eyes as she looked at Marcia. Garrett stood slowly, adjusting his cufflinks, his eyes never leaving Marcia's face. "Marcia here thinks she has a right to tell me who to marry." Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly before she let out a soft, incredulous laugh. She looked down at Marcia, who still knelt on the floor, clutching the cloth like a lifeline. "Get up now." Marcia rose slowly, her eyes on the floor, her hands shaking, her heart breaking with the knowledge that this was the end of everything she had known. "You're fired," Lauren said, her voice soft, almost gentle, but the words were sharp, final. Garrett did not stop her. He did not say a word. His face was cold, closed, unreadable as Marcia turned, her legs weak, her breath shallow, and walked out of the office, out of the room, out of the life she had built in the shadows of the Wells estate. She did not cry. Not as she packed her small bag in the tiny room she had lived in for 6 years. Not as she folded her uniform and placed it on the bed. Not as she walked through the halls she had cleaned and cared for with quiet dedication. The other staff watched her, some with tears in their eyes, some with fear. but none dared to speak. None dared to help. Marcia walked out of the house as the sun reached its peak, the world outside bright and blinding, the air heavy with the scent of roses and lemon polish. She walked past the vineyard, past the rose garden where Lauren had posed for engagement photos, past the gates that opened with a quiet groan as she stepped through them for the last time. By sunset, she was gone. Garrett did not think of her again. Not that day, not the next. He was too busy with meetings, fittings, guest lists, and the constant messages from Lauren about flowers, about colors, about the details of the perfect wedding. He told himself that Marcia had been foolish, superstitious, perhaps even jealous, unable to see her place in the grand order of the world he was building with Lauren. But deep inside him, buried beneath the plans, beneath the excitement, beneath the pressure of perfection, something small scratched at him, a memory, a whisper he could not fully silence. That night, Garrett found himself standing by the window, looking out into the darkness that had swallowed the vineyard, the rows of vines now just shadows against the moonlight. He heard Marcia's voice, soft but firm in the back of his mind. "Please, sir, don't marry Miss Lauren." He shook his head, forcing the memory away, forcing the fear away. He poured himself a drink, sat back down at his desk, and returned to his emails, to the details that needed his attention, to the life he was building. The warning never left him. It stayed, hidden in the quietest corner of his mind, a single candle flickering in a room he refused to enter, a reminder of the choice he had made, the voice he had chosen to ignore, the truth he did not want to see. The wedding was perfect, or at least that was what the cameras captured. The wedding was perfect, or so it seemed. The vineyard was alive with the quiet hum of 1,000 carefully orchestrated details, from the rows of white chairs set along the rolling greens to the arch of woven white roses and baby's breath where Garrett and Lauren exchanged their vows. The photographs captured the golden light of the California sun, the smiles that seemed effortless, the guests laughing, glasses raised in toasts, the newlyweds kissing beneath a scattering of rose petals. The papers called it the wedding of the season, a union of beauty and power, of wealth and promise. Lauren in her Vera Wang gown shimmering like moonlight, Garrett in his custom Italian tuxedo, standing together as if nothing could touch them, as if the world was theirs to command. And for a moment, Garrett believed it too, believed in the bright future they were creating together, believed in the smiles and the laughter, the congratulations and the well-wishes that poured in from every corner of their world. But beneath the perfection, there was a fracture, a hairline crack in the glass that separated their carefully crafted image from the truth. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there, and it started with the way Lauren moved through the house after the wedding, the way she began to rearrange the spaces that had once belonged to Garrett's parents, the way she spoke to the staff, dismissive but always with that practiced smile, the way she took phone calls in rooms she thought were empty, her voice low, sharp, controlling. At first, Garrett told himself it was nothing, that it was simply the adjustment of two lives merging, the necessary compromises of marriage, the merging of habits, the learning of each other's rhythms. Lauren laughed off his concerns when he raised them gently, kissed him, told him he was overthinking things, that she was just trying to help, that she wanted to build something with him, something lasting, something powerful. But the changes kept coming. Lauren began by asking the staff to leave the second floor by 7 in the evening, claiming she wanted privacy when she came out of the shower, that it was awkward to see them there, that it was better for everyone. Garrett found himself agreeing, telling the staff it was a small request, that it was only fair to respect their space. Then came the spending. Lauren opened new accounts, platinum cards arriving in silk-lined envelopes, bags from designer stores arriving at the house, shoes in boxes lined with tissue, art pieces delivered under heavy coverings, their price tags never discussed, but always felt in the air. She called them investments, said the art would increase in value, that the clothes were for events where appearance was power, where image was everything. At dinner, she spoke about connections, about people she was meeting, about opportunities that were coming their way. She talked about Dubai, about investors looking for partnerships, about deals that could take Haven Vineyards to a new level, to markets they had never imagined. Garrett listened, nodding, sipping his wine, watching her eyes light up as she spoke, seeing the ambition in her smile, the certainty that she knew what was best for them. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe in the future she painted with her words, in the dreams she described late at night when they lay in bed, her head on his chest, her voice soft as she spoke of the places they would go, the life they would have, the empire they would build together. He wanted to believe that she loved him, that she saw him, that she was not just with him for what he could give her. But there were moments, small moments, when doubt crept in. Moments when he saw her flinch when he entered a room unexpectedly, moments when he saw her delete messages from her phone, moments when her smile slipped and something cold and calculating passed across her face before she caught herself. He told himself it was nothing, that it was stress, that it was the pressure of the wedding, of the life they were building. Then came the proposal for the Dubai deal. Lauren brought it to him over dinner, a file placed gently beside his plate, her eyes bright with excitement as she explained the opportunity, the investors eager to partner, the land they could acquire, the returns that would come. The numbers looked impressive, too impressive, almost unreal in their promise, but Lauren's voice was so sure, so confident, that Garrett found himself nodding along, his doubts drowned in her certainty. Still, something in him hesitated. He told her he would have his legal team review it, that it was too important to rush. Her smile tightened, her hand pulling back slightly as she lifted her wine glass, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. "You don't trust me," she said softly, the words a knife wrapped in silk. "I trust you," he replied, "but I trust documents less." She laughed, but it was not the laugh he knew, not the one that used to light up the room. It was short, sharp, dismissive. "If you don't want to grow, Garrett, just say it." He looked at her, seeing her for a moment as if from a distance, seeing the way she held the glass, the way her eyes didn't quite meet his, the way her smile was just a little too perfect. "Growth without caution is suicide," he said quietly. She stood, leaving her half-finished dinner on the table, her chair scraping against the floor as she walked away, her back straight, her head high. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, of calls from the board, of questions about the Dubai deal, of pressure to decide, to move, to act. Lauren was there, always there, pushing, encouraging, telling him it was the right move, that it was the future, that it was what they needed to do to stay ahead, to stay powerful, to stay important. At night, Garrett found himself staring at the ceiling, sleep elusive, the numbers from the proposal running through his mind, the words Lauren had said echoing in the quiet. And then there was the phone call. It was 2:14 in the morning when he woke, the bed beside him empty, the air cold where her warmth should have been. He rose quietly, moving through the darkened house, following the faint sound of a voice, soft, urgent, coming from the study. Lauren was there, the light from the screen illuminating her face, her phone pressed to her ear, her other hand drumming lightly on the desk. He stood in the doorway, watching her. The words she spoke too soft to catch, but the tone, the urgency, the way she paused, listening, her eyes narrowing, told him enough. When she saw him, she froze, her eyes wide for a moment before she smiled, too quickly, too brightly. "Who are you talking to?" he asked, his voice calm, too calm. She laughed, shaking her head, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "My cousin. She's in Australia, different time zone, you know." "At 2 in the morning?" "She's going through a breakup. Her boyfriend cheated." "Can I not support my own cousin, Garrett?" He nodded slowly, the lie settling between them like a stone. "Of course." She came to him then, wrapping her arms around his neck, kissing him softly, her lips warm, her body pressing against his. "Come back to bed," she whispered. He followed her, holding her, but as he closed his eyes, the doubt remained, a whisper in the back of his mind, a warning he could no longer ignore. He thought of Marcia then, of the way she had looked at him, the fear in her eyes, the certainty in her voice. "Please, sir, don't marry Miss Lauren." He had not listened. Now, lying beside the woman he had chosen, the woman who smiled in public and whispered in the dark, Garrett Wells finally began to understand that a marriage built on masks could only hold for so long before the truth found a way to break through, leaving everything in its wake. And, as he drifted into an uneasy sleep, Garrett knew that the fracture in the glass was growing, that the perfect image they had created was beginning to crack, and that soon everything he had built would be tested by the truth he had tried so hard to ignore. The first cracks in Haven Vineyard's pristine image began quietly, like a faint hum beneath the everyday operations. A delayed shipment here, a missed payment there. Garrett noticed them, small errors that never used to happen, but he brushed them aside, blaming the rapid growth, the wedding preparations, the distractions that came with building a life with Lauren. He told himself everything would balance out once the Dubai deal was finalized, once the expansion he had worked so tirelessly to achieve was secured under his name. But the cracks widened. Clients who had always paid on time began to delay their invoices. Suppliers called with questions about bounced payments, and Garrett found himself in the office longer and longer, running numbers, checking accounts, calling his CFO late into the night to confirm transactions he couldn't remember authorizing. Lauren remained calm, unfazed, telling him it was normal, that he was overreacting, that this was what growth looked like. Messy, unpredictable, but worth it. She said it with her hand on his arm, her smile soft, her voice reassuring. But when she turned away, Garrett saw the flicker of calculation in her eyes, the way she pressed her lips together when she thought he wasn't watching. One morning, a supplier called in a panic. A payment for a large shipment of barrels had bounced, and they were holding the order. Garrett promised he would sort it out, but when he checked the account, it was empty, drained by a series of transactions he didn't recognize, payments sent to companies with names he had never heard before. He called Lauren, asking her if she knew anything about it, if she had made any transfers, any payments he should be aware of. She was at lunch with a friend, her voice light and breezy, telling him not to worry, that she would handle it, that it was all under control. "Don't stress yourself, darling," she said, laughing softly. "You worry too much." That night, Garrett sat in his office, the room dark except for the glow of the screen, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through the transaction histories, The transfers, the approvals with his signature at the bottom. His signature, but he didn't remember signing any of them. When he confronted Lauren, she was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, her hair loose around her shoulders, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't look up when he spoke, didn't move when he placed the printed documents on the coffee table in front of her. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. She glanced at the papers, raised an eyebrow, sipped her wine. "Business," she said simply. "These are my accounts," Garrett pressed, leaning forward, the papers trembling in his hands. "These are transactions I didn't approve, to companies I've never heard of." Lauren sighed, setting her wine down, finally meeting his eyes. "Garrett, you're being dramatic." "I'm being stolen from," he snapped, his voice rising for the first time in weeks, in months. Lauren's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Watch your tone." He stared at her, seeing her for who she was in that moment, seeing the cold calculation, the indifference, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the truth beneath it. "Who is Carter to you?" he demanded. Lauren's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "An old friend," she said slowly. "He's listed as a consultant on these transactions," Garrett said, throwing the papers onto the table, the pages scattering. "He's receiving payments from my company, payments you authorized." Lauren stood, her robe falling open slightly as she moved around the coffee table, picking up the papers one by one, her movements calm, deliberate. "You don't understand business, Garrett," she said quietly. "You never did. Don't lie to me." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for a moment her face softened, pity flashing across her features before hardening into something else, something cruel. "You're so naive," she said almost gently. "You think you're powerful, but you're not. You never were." Garrett felt something inside him break, a coldness spreading through his chest as he realized the truth he had been avoiding, the truth Marcia had tried to tell him, the truth he had refused to see. "You used me," he whispered. Lauren tilted her head, studying him like a curiosity, like a child who had just discovered the edge of the world. "No," she corrected. "I saved you. You were nothing without me. You would have stayed small, stuck in this vineyard, dreaming of a future you were too weak to achieve. You stole from me." "I built something for us," she countered, her voice rising, her hands gesturing sharply. "You think you're the victim here? You think you're the hero? You're not. You're just another man who thought he could own everything and everyone." Garrett took a step back, the room spinning around him, the reality crashing down, the pieces of his life falling apart around him, the empire he had built crumbling under the weight of his trust in the wrong person. Lauren moved closer, her eyes flashing, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You want to talk about betrayal, Garrett? You don't know what betrayal is." He turned away, unable to look at her, unable to stand in the same room, unable to breathe. The days that followed were chaos. Lawyers called, the board demanded explanations, clients pulled out of deals, investors withdrew their support. Headlines splashed across the news, questioning Garrett's leadership, questioning the integrity of Haven Vineyards, questioning everything he had worked for. The accounts were frozen. The auditors found dozens of transactions. Funds moved through shell companies tied back to names Garrett didn't recognize, companies that led to Carter, to Lauren, to a network of deception that stretched back further than he wanted to believe. His phone rang constantly, messages piling up, reporters waiting outside the gates, the staff whispering in the hallways, The house that had once been a sanctuary, now a prison of scandal and shame. Garrett stopped answering calls, stopped leaving the house, stopped sleeping. He sat in the dark, staring at the documents spread across his desk, the evidence of his failure, the proof of his blindness, the cost of his pride. He thought of Marcia then, of the way she had looked at him, the desperation in her voice, the courage it had taken for her to speak, the truth she had tried to give him, the truth he had thrown away. He remembered her words, the words that had haunted him in the quiet moments, the words he had tried to forget. "Please, sir, don't marry Miss Lauren." He hadn't listened. Now everything he had was gone, everything he had built was collapsing, and he was alone, sitting in the wreckage of his life, the echo of Marcia's warning ringing in his ears. He stood, moving to the window, looking out at the vineyard, the rows of vines swaying in the breeze, the sunlight catching on the leaves, the beauty of the world continuing despite his destruction. The life he had thought was perfect was nothing but an illusion, a mask he had worn to hide his fear, his weakness, his loneliness. In that moment, Garrett knew what he had to do. He had to find Marcia. She was the only one who had seen the truth, the only one who had tried to save him, the only one who could help him find a way back from the edge. And for the first time in months, in years, Garrett Wells allowed himself to hope that it wasn't too late to fix what had been broken, to reclaim the life he had lost, to become the man he had once promised himself he would be. Because the empire might have fallen, but he was still standing. And he would fight to rise again. Garrett did not know where to begin. The empire he had spent years building had collapsed in weeks, leaving him surrounded by silence where there had once been purpose. The vineyard still bloomed, but its beauty mocked him as creditors circled, clients withdrew, and headlines reduced his name to a symbol of scandal. His home felt empty, its echoing halls filled with memories of laughter that now seemed distant and artificial. Lauren was gone, but her presence lingered in the scent of her perfume on the pillows, the clothes she left in the closet, the coldness of her touch still lingering on his skin when he tried to sleep. The lawyers were fighting, the auditors were digging, and the board was watching him with quiet judgment, their polite silence sharper than any accusation. He had tried everything, calls to contacts in Dubai, quiet meetings with lawyers, late-night rereading of the contracts she had placed in front of him like gifts. It all led back to the same truth. He had signed them, or so it appeared, but the signature was not his. His name was on documents tied to shell companies, his accounts drained into networks controlled by Carter and Lauren, the paper trail as deliberate as it was devastating. Every conversation with the board ended with the same question: how could you not see it? The only answer Garrett had was the memory of a quiet voice, shaken but certain, the memory of a young woman who had seen what he could not. He had to find Marcia. At first, the search led nowhere. She had vanished the day she was fired, her small room left clean, the bed made, her belongings gone. No forwarding address, no relatives on record except a mother who had passed away 6 months before the wedding. The other staff were afraid to speak, shaking their heads quickly when he asked, looking away with fear and pity. Garrett hired a private investigator, a quiet man named Hale with tired eyes and a firm handshake. Hale spent days tracing payroll records, health insurance claims, any paper trail Marcia might have left. He called Garrett in the middle of the night, whispering, "She's not trying to hide. She just slipped away." Days passed. Garrett stopped eating, stopped shaving, stopped answering the phone unless it was Hale. He sat by the window at night, the vineyard silver under moonlight, whispering her name as if she could hear him across the miles. Then, one afternoon, Hale appeared at the door, a folder in his hand. "She's alive," Hale said simply, "and she's working." The folder contained a faded flyer from a small community center in Oakland, a place called Truth Haven, offering help for women leaving abusive situations, a program for education and job training, a food pantry. At the bottom of the flyer, in small, careful letters, Community Lead, Marcia Bell. Garrett drove there himself, ignoring the protests of his lawyer, ignoring the calls from the board demanding his presence. He wore jeans and a plain shirt, a baseball cap pulled low, hoping to be invisible as he parked across the street from the small brick building sandwiched between a laundromat and a shuttered corner store. The building was clean but tired. The sign above the door chipped, the steps cracked but swept. Women sat outside with children, waiting quietly, sharing food, comforting each other with tired smiles. Garrett watched them, wondering how many stories they carried, how many truths the world had ignored. He walked to the door, his hands shaken, and stepped inside. The air smelled of boiled rice and soap, the hum of conversation wrapping around him. Posters lined the walls. "You are not alone. Your story matters. Silence protects no one." At the reception desk, a young woman looked up, her eyes wary. "I'm looking for Marcia Bell," Garrett said, his voice almost breaking. "Who?" she asked. He pulled the flyer from his pocket, smoothing it carefully, showing her the name. She studied him for a long moment, then picked up the phone, speaking softly. A moment later, she looked back at him. "Down the hall, last door on the right." Garrett walked down the narrow hallway, each step heavy, his breath tight in his chest. At the end of the hall, the door was open, and there she was. Marcia stood by a small desk, her hair in neat braids, a simple brown dress, no makeup, her posture calm and steady. She was helping a young woman fill out paperwork, her voice soft but firm, her eyes kind. When she looked up and saw him, she did not smile, but she did not look away. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Marcia," he whispered. They stood in silence as the young woman gathered her papers and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Garrett looked at Marcia, really looked at her, seeing the strength in her posture, the calm in her eyes, the certainty in the way she stood, unafraid, unashamed. "I've been looking for you," he said. "I heard," she replied. He took a step forward, then another, until he was standing in front of her, his hands trembling, his eyes wet. "You tried to warn me." "Yes," she said simply. "I didn't listen." "No," she agreed. Garrett swallowed, the weight of everything he had lost pressing down on him, the shame of his blindness, the pain of his pride. "I need your help." Marcia's eyes softened, but her posture did not change. "What do you want from me?" "Your mind," Garrett said. "Your instincts. You saw through her when I couldn't. I need that now. I need you to help me fix this." Marcia was silent for a long moment, studying him, seeing the man he had become, the man broken by his choices, the man asking for help not out of pride but out of need. "Please," Garrett whispered. "You're the only person I trust now." Marcia looked down, then back at him, her eyes clear, steady. "I will help you," she said, "but on one condition." "Anything. No lies, no pride, no pretending." Garrett nodded, the first genuine nod he had felt in months. "Deal." They began that day. Garrett brought files, transaction histories, documents with signatures he no longer trusted. They spread them across a small table in Marcia's office, working late into the night, a single overhead fan spinning quietly above them as they traced the money, the names, the shell companies. Marcia moved quickly, her eyes scanning, her mind sharp. "These names," she said, pointing to a list of company registrations, "they're aliases, but see these 3 digits? They repeat in every company code. That's a pattern." Garrett leaned in, his breath catching. "You saw that in seconds." "I've seen it before," Marcia said, flipping to the next page. "This is a scam network. They reuse codes because they don't expect anyone to look this closely." They worked for 3 days, sleeping only in short bursts, eating takeout in silence as they pieced together the puzzle. 14 shell companies, 11 tied directly to Carter, 3 with payments routed through accounts that led back to Lauren. When Garrett saw her name, the betrayal he felt was cold, clean, a wound that had stopped bleeding but still hurt. "Carter," he said, his jaw tightening. Marcia looked at him, her expression unreadable. "He's not just a partner, Garrett. He's her handler." The truth settled between them, heavy, undeniable. "This wasn't just a marriage scam," Marcia continued. "This was a hostile takeover." Garrett stood, pacing, his hands pulling at his hair. "We need to go to the police." "Not yet," Marcia said, holding up a hand. "If we go now, they'll vanish. We need them to feel safe, to let down their guard, to give us proof we can take to the authorities." Garrett stopped, looking at her, seeing not a maid, but the strategist, the protector, the truth-teller she had always been. "Then what do we do?" Marcia looked at him, her eyes steady. "We play smarter. We set a trap." That night, Garrett called Lauren. His voice was calm, measured, practiced. "We need to talk," he said. "Now?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he said. "Come to the condo, alone." She hesitated, but then, after a pause, she agreed. As he hung up, he looked at Marcia, who nodded once. "She won't come alone," she said. "I know," Garrett replied, "but we'll be ready." He called Hale, called his oldest friend, Chuka, called the private security team he trusted, and together they prepared the trap. And for the first time in a long time, Garrett Wells felt ready to fight for the truth, to reclaim the life he had lost, to stand beside the only person who had never lied to him, the only person who had seen him clearly. Marcia. The maid who had once been a shadow in his house, now standing beside him as the storm they would face finally arrived. Lauren arrived at the condo wearing black, her hair pinned back sharply, her makeup stripped away to the essentials that made her face look ageless, untouched by the sleepless nights Garrett knew she had been having. She stepped through the doorway with the confidence of someone who believed the world still bent for her posture easy, her lips tilted in a small, careful smile as she looked around the living room, taking in the quiet, the waiting. "You look tired," she said softly, setting her purse down on the table, crossing her arms as she studied him. Garrett stood by the window, the lights dimmed, the curtains open to the view of the city below, glittering under the night sky. He turned to her slowly, his face calm, unreadable. "So do you." Lauren tilted her head, her smile tightening. "What's this about, Garrett? You said it was urgent." He took a step forward, his hands loose at his sides. "I know about the accounts," he said quietly. "The fake companies, the money, Carter." Lauren didn't flinch, but her eyes darkened, her jaw tightening for the briefest moment before she smoothed her expression, letting out a small, dry laugh. "You're bluffing." "I'm done fighting you, Lauren," Garrett said, keeping his voice even. "I'm done pretending this marriage was ever real." Her eyes narrowed, her fingers tapping against her arm. "You think you're going to win, Garrett? That you can walk away clean?" He ignored her question, stepping closer. "Just tell me what you want." Lauren relaxed slightly, her arms dropping to her sides. "What do I want?" She let out a slow breath, shaking her head as if amused. "I want what I'm owed. I want the life I built, the life I made possible for you." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "You mean the life you tried to steal?" She smiled, slow, cold. "Call it what you want." Just then, the door opened behind her and Carter stepped in, wearing a dark jacket, his eyes flicking over Garrett before settling on Lauren. "We good?" he asked, his voice low, casual, but there was a tension in the way he held himself, the way his hand hovered near his pocket. "You brought him," Garrett said, looking at Lauren. She shrugged. "I don't do anything without protection." Carter smirked, stepping forward. "So, how's this going down, Wells?" Garrett didn't answer. The lights flickered once, twice, before steadying. The front door burst open and Chuka stepped in with two private security men, weapons visible at their sides, calm, controlled. Behind them, Marcia entered, her eyes clear, her posture steady, wearing a plain gray coat, her braid resting over her shoulder. Lauren's head snapped toward Marcia, shock flashing across her face before it hardened into rage. "You?" Marcia stepped forward, her hands in her pockets, her gaze calm. "Hello, Lauren." Carter reached for his pocket, but one of the guards raised his weapon. "Don't." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thick, the air heavy with the sound of breathing, the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Then, the sirens. Red and blue lights flashed outside the windows as the police arrived, their footsteps heavy in the hallway before they entered, weapons drawn, voices firm as they surrounded Carter and Lauren, placing them under arrest. Lauren's face was pale, her mouth opening to speak, to deny, to plead, but no words came as they placed the cuffs on her wrists, pulling her arms behind her back. Garrett watched, his expression unreadable, his hands trembling slightly at his sides as the officers read out the charges: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Carter tried to argue, his voice rising in panic, but it was too late. Lauren turned her head, her eyes finding Garrett's, and for a moment the mask fell completely, and all he saw was the emptiness, the desperation, the truth she had hidden so carefully behind her beauty, her ambition, her coldness. She looked away. As they led her out, Garrett let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding, his shoulders slumping, the weight of the past years leaving him in that single exhale. Marcia stepped forward, standing beside him, her hands still in her pockets, her eyes on the door where Lauren and Carter had just disappeared. "Thank you," Garrett said, his voice hoarse. Marcia looked at him, her expression softening slightly. "It's not over yet," she replied, "but now you have a chance." He nodded slowly, turning to look at her fully, seeing not the maid who had once moved through his house like a shadow, but the woman who had saved him, who had stood when no one else would, who had spoken the truth when he was too blind to see. "A chance to start over," he said. The days that followed were quiet, the chaos replaced by a stillness that felt strange, unsettling, but welcome. The house was empty, the rooms silent except for the creak of the floors, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The vineyard was still there, the leaves turning gold as the season shifted, the workers moving through the rows, the air filled with the scent of earth and grapes. The headlines changed slowly, shifting from scandal to redemption as the truth came out, as the documents Marcia had helped him collect were handed over to the authorities as the real story was told. The clients returned, cautious but willing. The board softened, the whispers of doubt turning to cautious support. Garrett did not return to the public eye immediately. He stayed home, working quietly, rebuilding, calling meetings with his staff, apologizing, listening, learning. He brought Marcia to Haven Vineyards, standing beside her as he introduced her to the team, telling them that she would be leading the new ethics and transparency department, that she was the reason they were still standing, that her voice would never again be silenced. Some were surprised, some uncomfortable, but many nodded, seeing in her the quiet strength they had overlooked, the clear eyes that saw what others ignored. Marcia accepted the position with quiet dignity, her posture straight, her eyes calm as she spoke to the staff. "I'm not here to punish," she said. "I'm here to protect, to make sure no one's voice is ignored again." The applause was quiet, but it was real. That evening, Garrett walked Marcia to her car, the gravel crunching under their feet, the sky painted with the fading light of sunset over the vineyard. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked. Marcia looked at him, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "I've been ready," she said. "I just needed the right door to open." Garrett nodded, looking down at the ground, then back at her. "When you left, I never thought I'd see you again." "I know," she said. "I don't want you to go." She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Then learn what you need to learn while I'm here." He nodded, the truth settling between them, a quiet promise. The weeks passed, the company stabilizing, clients returning, deals reopening, the vineyard alive with work and hope. Garrett spent his days walking the fields, speaking with workers, learning the names he had once ignored, understanding the land he had once taken for granted. At night, he sat with Marcia, going over plans for community programs, for staff training, for the transparency initiatives she was leading. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the vineyard, Garrett turned to her, a question in his eyes. "You ever think about going back to school?" he asked. Marcia chuckled, shaking her head. "You trying to sponsor me?" "Maybe," she smiled. "I already finished my degree online. Psychology. Took me 4 years." Garrett blinked, surprised, then let out a soft laugh. "You never stopped surprising me." "Most people never bothered to ask," she replied, looking out over the vines. Garrett was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I'm asking now." Marcia didn't look at him, but he saw the small smile on her face, the way her shoulders relaxed. "I'm not chasing degrees, Garrett," she said. "I'm chasing truth. If that takes me into classrooms, fine. If it takes me into broken homes, even better." "You're amazing," he said quietly. She turned to him, her eyes clear. "I'm focused. There's a difference." He smiled, nodding. "Right." They sat in silence, the air cool around them, the scent of earth and grapes rising as the night settled over the land. The quiet was not empty now. It was filled with promise, with the steady rhythm of a new beginning. "Do you ever think you'll get tired of fixing other people's messes?" Garrett asked. Marcia shook her head, looking up at the stars. "Never. Because somewhere, someone is still being lied to, still being played, still being silenced. And if I can stop that from happening, even once, it's worth it." Garrett raised his glass. "To truth," Marcia raised hers. "To people who listen." That night, back in his study, Garrett picked up the wedding photo of him and Lauren. He looked at it for a long moment, the image of a perfect day that had been a perfect lie. He did not smash it. He simply opened the back of the frame, slid the photograph out, and threw it into the fireplace, watching as the flames took it, curling the edges, turning it to ash. In its place, he put a new photograph, the staff photo taken earlier that week, with Marcia standing in the center, her smile small but real, her eyes looking forward, not for the camera, but for the future. And for the first time in a long time, Garrett Wells felt at peace, ready to begin again, ready to live in a world where the truth was no longer something to fear, but something to build upon. The vineyard waited, the rows of vines swaying gently in the night breeze, the land patient, forgiving, ready to grow again. And so was he. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Check out our other videos and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you know someone who would love this story, share this video with them too.